Clara Schumann was a well-known piano prodigy. She was on the concert circuit for 60 years, wrote dozens of compositions, and for a time was more famous than her husband, the composer Robert Schumann. This is Classical Gas, a podcast series produced by Classical Voice North America. I'm Gail Wine. Sarah Fritz is a musicologist who has been obsessed for the better part of the last decade with the life, music, and place in history of Clara Schumann. Her biography, Madame Composer, The Virtuosic Genius of Clara Schumann, will be out in fall 2026. Fritz told me her interest was sparked at the beginning of the pandemic, when we all had a lot of time on our hands.
I started reading Clara Schumann's letters with Johannes Brahms, because I was really obsessed with Brahms's music at that point. And I realized that she was far more brilliant and important via those letters than anyone had really ever explained to me in music school. And so that made me look up her diaries, and I got so mind blown by how much more important she was than I had realized and been taught. And so I started tweeting about her every day, thinking I might find a few hundred people who are also like Clara fanatics. And it turned into thousands of people. It was incredible to find just how many more people were shocked about just how relevant Clara Schumann was beyond just standard common knowledge.
All of that to the point where, fast forward to now, you've written a biography called Madame Composer that's out in October 2026. What made you decide to write a book? That's kind of a major undertaking. That's a lot more than a tweet.
I knew I wanted to write something about Clara Schumann. I thought about doing a novel, but then I realized there were so many myths and so many fictional retellings of her life. And there wasn't a biography that's regularly stocked on bookstore shelves right now. So if you go to the music shelves in a bookstore, the average person, the only way they're going to learn about Clara Schumann is through books about Robert Schumann and Johannes Brahms. And she looks like a sideshow in those books. And she really, really was not. When it comes to German romantic music, she was an absolute giant in the 19th century, and it needs to be told in a way that is gonna really resonate with the 2020s audience. I feel like everyone who loves music should know who Clara Schumann is. I love her music that much. She's my favorite.
Clara Schumann seems to be sort of in a renaissance now, a renaissance of interest in her life, her music, that predates your obsession, but not by much. Why?
Well, 2019 was her 200th anniversary of her birth. And so that was a really big kickoff for a lot of concerts playing her music. Her music has been popular in the past. It's gone in waves. It's gone up and down. It has not been a linear, suddenly she's being discovered. There were recordings being made of her work in the 70s. The first recording I've found is an LP of her trio from the 50s.
Right. One thing I learned from your newsletter, one of many things, is that in her lifetime, she was more famous than her husband, Robert Schumann. And then I started thinking, well, at some point that changed. When and how did it change?
It's a fascinating story. And everyone has been so fascinated by it. Clara and Robert's relationship as musicians, as composers, co-composers. They were working together. At one point, Robert even joked about them writing an opera together before they even married. Obviously, that never happened. But they really were composing side by side for even a decade before they got married, because Clara Schumann was a prodigy on an epic scale that's sort of hard to describe. Like, she was internationally famous by the time she was 18 years old, and all the men were jealous of the fame she achieved so young. And so for part of their marriage, Robert was known as the husband of Clara Wieck. But also what happened was that the more respectability her husband gained as a composer, thus her own social status would then elevate with his fame increasing. So the morph between her becoming really famous as Madame Schumann, which is where I get the title for my book, Madame Composer, really happened after Robert had died. But everyone knew for all her life, all up through the 1880s, everyone who knew her knew she had been famous first.
Right.
It was only in the 20th century that got lost.
Yeah. So. Yeah. One of the other points that you've made in the writing on your Substack, and surely will be a major point in your book, is that she spent 60 years as a performer. And in that time, there were many things that were firsts, one of which was she was one of the firsts to memorize the music and play from memory. Like, really? Nobody else, first of all, nobody else thought to do that. And second of all, why would anybody think to do that?
Yeah. So, Clara was the first really to memorize her entire repertoire. When she was 12, she started memorizing everything. She was so fast. Like, her level of child genius is rather indescribable. At age 12, she was the first to perform the, quote, unplayable new works of Chopin in Germany. And so before Clara started, it was very controversial that she was playing Beethoven from memory, that she was playing full concerts from memory, because at that point, they worried you were improvising, that you weren't being true to the score. How could you possibly memorize every note? How do we know you're not making it up?
She shaped the canon of music, and that was also revelatory to me. First of all, I didn't know that a person shaped canon, and then I thought, well, what is the canon? And there's maybe a little bit that we could talk about of, what is the canon of classical music, and what was her part in shaping it. And I'm sure most of that aspect was all the programming that she did.
Yes, her programming skills were amazing. It was an art form, what she did with concert programs, and we take for granted how well our programs are done. She had some that bombed and failed. She was the first to make Beethoven sonatas and Bach fugues part of the popular concert successfully. Other people had done it, but she was the first person to do it and cause a sensation. And so Clara's goal always was to teach these new ticket-buying middle-class concert-goers what art music was. That Beethoven should not just be played by the amateur who can play Beethoven sonatas, but there was an art form to interpretation, and that the performer's ability to communicate to the audience what the composer intended with the work. And this is where Clara's ability as a composer was integral to what she achieved, because she really, when she said she understood Beethoven's intentions, when she said she understood Bach's intentions, it meant note by note she understood how they built it and why. But yes, she curated the canon. It did not fall from the sky, pre-made, like delivered by a stork, or come to us like the Bible.
Delivered by a stork, like her 8 children.
Yes, her 8 children. Yeah, we could talk about that. Yeah. She was busy.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit like when people talk about Ginger Rogers, and then she did everything that Fred Astaire did, only backward and heels. So she did, everything that her husband Robert Schumann did, only while also raising 8 children and being a uber successful performer and composer.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Clara had such an abnormal childhood that she would say she sacrificed her childhood to art, but it left her wanting to be a normal woman. Also, she really wanted to get married and have children. And the first 4 children she had, she was very excited to have them. But after that, she starts saying things in her diary like, "What will become of my work?" And by the 8th pregnancy, she writes for her husband to read, "I have every reason to despair. My last good years are passing away." So she genuinely had more children than she wanted. Um, and, after Robert died, she was a single parent. She was 36 and she supported all of them with her performing career.
Amazing. Well, I guess that was one overarching thing that I kept thinking anytime I hear anything amazing about Clara Schumann. I thought, why did it take so long to surface to us in the 21st century?
Well, part of it was done by Clara herself because, as we well know, because this still exists for women in the 21st century, that modesty and humility are sort of expected of us. And when we tout our own achievements and are loud about them, we're not seen as good people. So she did not preach loudly about her excellence. She was very confident in herself and proud of her work, and very aware of her power and skill. But she was always very quick to deflect praise on herself onto the men's work she played.
Dovetailing into, we've got to talk about Brahms. So
too.
for the longest time, like pretty much ever since I learned about Brahms and Schumann and Robert Schumann and Clara Schumann, I was like, did they? Didn't they? But that's almost not even important.
It's almost not, but it's everyone's question. I've even had academics ask me that question, so it's just human nature to wonder, of course.
I just want to see them, like, in my mind's eye, sitting in bed, smoking a cigarette, post-coital cigarette, and saying, that D sharp minor measure.
Oh, you know what? They absolutely were doing their own version of that. There is proof that he woke her up from naps. They were living together. There was, in a way, more intimacy between them than we can imagine, because for them, sitting at the piano together, working on his compositions or just working on music they loved, like they would wordlessly press each other's hands when they came to a beautiful passage.
That's hot, man. That is hot.
It's more erotic than being in bed. Like, let's be honest about that. Did they? Didn't they? They do actually like go way into it in the book. They may have. There was plenty of opportunity. But they covered their tracks and kept their privacy.
Yeah. No conversation about Clara Schumann would be complete without talking about her compositions. What made her distinctive as a composer?
My way of falling in love with Clara as a composer is through just how much emotion and feeling there is in every phrase of what she writes. And when I learned to understand that when I hear those emotions in music, it's not weakness, it's vulnerability, it's profundity, it's very profound. So that's what's most interesting with Clara, is the feeling. And so when we hear Clara's work, we should hear beautiful harmonies that are dissonant and complex, and layers upon layers of counterpoint and melodies intertwining, from this woman who studied advanced counterpoint from the age of 10 and sonata form, from the same time. She wrote some beautiful romances. Of course, her piano trio, her piano sonata, her piano concerto, and she has some very flashy sets of variations that are just stunning. And I love her lieder, her songs. One of the things people say is that there's not very much music, and I say, do you know it all? There's quite a bit. Have a look.
When you mentioned that she didn't talk until she was 4, she had sort of a late development language-wise and was playing piano before she was speaking. Do you have any guesses about sort of a neurological, or was she on the spectrum, or was it just a sort of Tommy?
Yeah. Once I started really looking for, is she neurodivergent? Like, is she on the spectrum? I started finding a lot of clues pointing to very possibly, maybe even probably. Nobody else has really talked about this. It's hard to talk about it in a book, only going off of written evidence, because we have no recordings or videos. I literally only have what she's told us and what other people say about her. But it's definitely something I'm exploring quite a bit. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. She's
Fascinating.
a fascinating person on so many levels. Yeah.
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 Well, Sarah Fritz, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation, and it's just been great to talk to you and really inspiring to read some of what you've written on your Substack and on your website. Can't wait till your book comes out.
Thank you, Gail. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Author Sarah Fritz. Her biography on the composer and pianist Clara Schumann is called Madam Composer. It will be published in October 2026 by Pegasus Books. This is Classical Gas. I'm Gail Wine, producer and host of this podcast series. Thanks for listening.